What's up YouTube, Dell here from Zephyr, and today I am bringing you Kyron's first place undefeated local Dogmatika ritual profile. This deck took on Pearlies, Dark Worlds, Crystal Beast and Labyrinth and was able to come out unscathed the other end of it. So with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. So now I'm going to take you through the profile, show you what we've got and explain why we've got it. So you start off with two of the main boss monster being your Dogmatika Albas Zoa. So this was a super rare that came out in Photon Hypernova and it has an insanely powerful effect. So it must specifically be ritual summoned by using Dogmatika Calamity or another Dogmatika card effect. Dogmatika monsters you control are unaffected by the activated effects of your opponent's Fusion, Synchro, XYZ and Link monsters. During the main phase you can make your opponent choose and apply one of these effects. They have to choose the one that they can actually apply. So what I mean for that is, for every 2 cards in your extra deck, send 1 card from your hand or extra deck to the graveyard, so that's your opponent. Or return all Fusion, Synchro, XYZ and Link monsters they control to the extra deck. So if they don't control any of those monsters, they have to send from the extra deck, which is why it's so good going this turn 0, because you pretty much rip away their extra deck. Then got the 1 White Knight of Dogmatika and of course the 1 White Relic of Dogmatika as well. So what you've got to keep in mind is more times than not when you're summoning these, you're going to be locking yourself out of the extra deck. The biggest downside of the White Knight is the fact that it locks you out of your extra deck permanently while it's on the board. Now there is a little bit of a kind of play that I've been talking to Kyron about, and what I like the idea of it is sending Predaplant Chimera Phlesia from the extra deck to then search out a Red Eyes Fusion for the next turn. It means you rely on this guide a lot less. But the idea would be that if your opponent breaks your board or anything like that, you then have a Red Eyes Fusion into a Dark Dragoon as a crackback. But there is some other spice in the deck that helps you get into Dragoon anyway. For the last ritual monster, we've got the 1 Saravis. Now, Kyron said that this came in so much clutch for him against the Labyrinth player because constantly wanted to keep targeting his stuff and he was able to protect it with the Saravis as well. For the Dogmatika monsters, of course, you've got triple Ecclesia. So this is your main Dogmatika monster. The one kind of thing that this deck does struggle with is getting a monster from the extra deck onto the board so you can special summon Ecclesia freely without needing to worry about using up your normal summon for it, because you mainly want to save your normal summon for Diviner of the Herald. Then of course you've got 2 Dogmatika Maximus. Now this card is only as good as the format, and what I mean by that is it's only as good as long as people are not already playing stuff like Natis. They're not already playing, like very rarely are people going to be playing Cyber Dragon Infinity or Nova into whatever monster they want to go for. But the idea is that right now the Maximus puts in so much work because you're able to send stuff like Lulu Walif, you're able to send stuff like Titaniclad, you're getting yourself searches or summons during the end phase of the turn, and then you're able to push further forward as well. Not to mention that this is a level 8 Spellcaster Light monster alongside your Dogmatika Fleur-Delis, because both of these are great duality targets to get into your Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Then we've got a very small Albas engine. Now to me, this isn't a branded engine, this is actually just an Albas engine, so it fits the lore quite nicely. So you've got the 1 Fawn of Albas, the 1 Ecclesia and the 1 Cartesia. Now obviously this engine is quite a nice option because you can summon out Ecclesia off of the back of your Titaniclad. Is it Titaniclad? Which one summons it off of the back of?
Lulu Walif.
It's Lulu Walif. We'll get there eventually. So Lulu Walif summons out the Ecclesia, and then what that gives you is usually when you're locking yourself in or out of the extra deck during your turn, you can actually Ecclesia into Albas and then go into the extra deck during your opponent's turn, which is a very nice alternative. Not to mention as well that technically Ecclesia is a tuner, so that can come up in certain scenarios. But for now, it's just generally pretty cool to be able to quick effect tag this out into Albas, and either you're going to contact fuse with your opponent's board during your turn, or more times than not, you'll do it during your opponent's turn when you're no longer locked. The main normal summon of the deck is of course going to be your Diviner of the Herald. The idea is you normal summon this, you send your Herald of the Arclight from the extra deck to the graveyard, search yourself out the ritual monster or the ritual spell that you may be missing. Then we've got triple Fenri. This is just, you know, such a powerful, like, I wouldn't even say engine, such a powerful generic monster for the actual game right now that you kind of need to go for it. The fact that it just searches out another copy of itself, so even if they do crack the board, you're good to follow back up on it. The target banish can be invaluable because it really does cause your opponent a lot of issues as they're trying to hold back. And it's such a strong monster that can come from the main deck. So if you do extra deck lock yourself, or you plan to anyway, it's still going to be able to pose a threat to your opponent. Then for the Bestial engine, again, apart from the Fenris, all of this pretty much follows the lore, which I think is really kind of cool. So you've got the triple Lubellion, the one Magnemute, the one Druid Swarm, and the one Saronir. So the reason you're playing with 3 Lubellion is you do really want to see it as early as you possibly can. The idea is that you're going to ditch this, you're going to get to Saronir or Druid Swarm or Magnemute, and then you're going to be able to extend your plays further forward. They're very easy to summon because you are putting a lot of lights and darks from the extra deck to the graveyard, and then you're able to get double usage off of the back of like a Herald of the Art Light. Not to mention that when you're locking yourself out of the extra deck, you still need boss monsters. You don't want the deck to be a full-on control because it will slow the game down, and your control aspect of monsters is not always cut and dry to be an out-and-out win option as well. So the Bestials come in to give you that bit of firepower, as well as being able to set up your Regained and your Beast to give you that ability to add back from the Banish Zone, get a nice draw, or bring back from the graveyard and then pop cards as well. Moving on to the spells, Triple Nadir Servant. This card is like the crux of the entire deck. What makes this so good, which is mainly why you play the White Relic as well, is when you activate this, not only are you searching out the White Relic because it's 500 attack, but it's also then sending one from the extra deck, which can be your Herald, and the Herald can then get you the ritual spell that you might need. Incredibly powerful, very, very useful, and does everything you need for the deck. Then another one of the more recent ones is the Dogmatika Matrix. And for those of you, I probably should have said this as a start, but for those of you that are wondering why this deck is now a thing again, is because you don't need to worry about Rise Heart, and all of their cards need to send from the extra deck as cost to the graveyard, so it all got stopped with Rise Heart. So triple Dogmatika Matrix. When this card is activated, you get to add a Dogmatika Ritual monster or a Dogmatika Ritual spell from the deck to your hand. Then if your opponent controls a monster, you can add one Dogmatika card from your deck to the hand. Once per turn, if you control a Dogmatika Ritual monster, you can look at either player's extra deck, send one monster from it to the graveyard. So you've got a designated search and destroy, technically, from the extra deck. Not to mention that more times than not, going second, this card is a search 2, which is absolutely insane. Because it does it all in one, you're guaranteed to get your 2 cards before you get hit with draw, which is really nice. Then we've got the one Dogmatika Cambrai, I believe it is. So this card can be used to ritual summon any Dogmatika Ritual monster from your hand or graveyard. You must also tribute monsters from your hand or field and or banish fusion synchro monsters from the graveyard whose total levels equal or exceed the level of the ritual monster you are trying to ritual summon. Then, if both White Knight of Dogmatika and White Relic Dogmatika are on the field, you can look at either extra deck and then send one monster from it to the graveyard. So the reason you play one of that one and then 2 of the Dogmatika Calamity, quite like every ritual deck out there, you kind of want to minimize and balance your ritual monsters to your ritual spells. This one lets you banish from the graveyard, whereas the Calamity definitely deserves a rarity upgrade because this card's insane. It's used to ritual summon any Dogmatika Ritual monster. You tribute monsters from your hand or field whose total levels equal or exceed the level of the ritual monster. Or you get to send one monster from your extra deck to the graveyard whose level equals the level of the ritual monster you are attempting to ritual summon. For the rest of this turn after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck. So this card's just absolutely insane, which is why you are utilising cards like Lulu Warliff now, because of that level 12 factor does give you that technical way of being able to get to your Albas very easily. Triple Preparation of Right, so obviously this is going to be able to get you a non-target protection in the form of Saravis. It's then also going to be able to get you into your White Relic or your White Knight should you need to. It's a shame it doesn't get you the Albas, works just as well. And then for your Dogmatikas, you've got triple Duality. This is just kind of trying to utilize a card that lets you access the extra deck during your opponent's turn, so you don't worry about the lock that you get during your turn. Not to mention as well, its graveyard effect to put back light and dark, giving it a nice little draw, is also going to be near invaluable. And it's a nice budget alternative to something like Prosperity, because you want to make sure you maintain as many different targets from your extra deck as possible. The last 2 cards is a Branded in Red and a Dogmatika Punishment. You could maximize out on the punishments if you want to. The Branded in Red is just another nice option that should you send your Albion from the extra deck to the graveyard, you still have access to a branded card or a fusion route. You could play Guardian Chimera in the extra deck if you wanted to, because it does have a nice level, and it's also going to be a very good target to summon off of the back of Branded in Red. But what you do need to keep in mind is that the target in the graveyard that you're going to add back to your hand to then attempt to fusion summon, more times than not, will be your Fallen of Albas. So the card currently sits, or the deck sits at 45 cards. So you'd have 5 cards that if you can find, you can cut them down, and then you'll have a little bit more flexibility to what you want to do. You can also see that there is very minimal hand traps, and that's because you're using the Bestials as the hand traps of the deck, just because you want your consistency as much as possible. I feel the only thing that is missing from here is a very nice techie deck of Chaos Max, but you know, you're just kind of asking for a bit of trouble doing it that way. I'll show you the extra deck and then I'll show you his side deck. So for the extra deck, we'll go off the high levels first. You've got your 2 Despian Lulu Walif. So not only do these have great graveyard effects when they're sent from the extra deck to the graveyard, but they also utilize that level 12 which you need for your Albas or Zoa. We've then got 2 level 8s, one in the form of Omega, and then the one of the Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, which initially I was like, why the hell is this in here? But then I was also like, oh, hang on a minute. You can tag out your Lubellion, which is a light dragon, into a Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend, which is a dark dragon, that also gives you the ability to kind of pop and burn. So name becomes Red Dragon Archfiend while it is on the field or in the graveyard, and then once per turn you get to destroy as many special summoned effect monsters on the field as possible with attack less than or equal to this card, other than this card, and then inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each monster destroyed. So it doesn't need to be synchro summoned to get that effect off, and what it will then give you is it gives you that ability for a time con option, as well as a board wipe, and the ability to push that final bit of damage you might need to finish the game off. For the last synchro monsters, of course, Herald of the Arclight. This is pretty standard. Send from the extra deck to the graveyard, give you a search. Goes all the way back to Necros days. Such a good card and gets you what you need. For the fusion monsters, of course, for your branded targets, you've got your Titaniclad, your Albion, Mirror Jade, Dust Dragon. Pretty straightforward on all of these. So obviously you can Cartesia fuse into this, which gives you an additional Foolish Burial should you need it. Mirror Jade is just a bit of a boss monster. And then you've got your Ash Dragon, which searches you out or summons you out at Dogmatika during the end phase. So this is one you're going to rely on sending more times than not. And of course you've got your Albion as a nice little send target for the back of the Mirror Jade as well. I know there were a couple of people that were like, I want no branded involved at all. But technically, I know some people play like branded fusion with the Dogmatika engine around it. Whereas I quite like the fact that this is minimized. So you are literally only using Albas in the main deck as a form to break a bit of a board. And then you're utilizing all of the fusion monsters in order to kind of get everything you need. Then for your punishment targets, of course, you've got your Elder Entity Ints. Now, obviously, these become more prominent when you start going into the side deck because you can put in more punishments. Like I said, I would personally look at the idea of maybe cutting one Natis and putting in the Predaplant Chimera Flesia as another target to send, and then that gives you the option to main deck a Red Eyes Fusion. You could also, if you really wanted to, look at the Shadow engine, which is one Schism, and then you play App Clone and Winder in your extra deck, and the idea is that during your opponent's turn, you activate Schism, which is searched by sending your App Clone from the extra deck to the graveyard, search that out, discard a card, set the Schism, activate the Schism, banishing a Dark Monster, and then banishing a App Cologne to make a Winder during your opponent's turn. Now obviously that will rely on you putting more darks into the graveyard because you will need that other dark option because your main of your deck is all light as well. Then of course your target off of the back of Duality mainly want to be going into is your Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. It is pretty much your game winner at that one, and that's why I feel you could very easily bump this up to 2 and you could tech in that Red Eyes Fusion so you've got a crack back option. And the idea is that when you're teching Red Eyes Fusion, you're going to be playing Red Eyes and Dark Magician, so that when you're going to tech into it, you're going to be able to burn, pop and do everything you need to. And the last card is the one Almirage, just so that you can turn your Diviner into Almirage, and then you've got a monster from the extra deck on the board that allows you to start special summoning your Ecclesia up from the hand, and of course utilizing something like Maximus, because you can tribute off your Almirage as well. And then that will allow you to put a extra deck monster in the graveyard, meaning that it can be banished off of the back of your Maximus. So you're pretty much setting up full combo off the back of a Diviner as well. Moving on to the side deck. So for the side deck, it is double Droll and a single Bestial Bulldrake. Probably should be triple Droll, but that just comes down to the environment and what cards were available at the time for him. Then, of course, we've got Triple Tactics Thrust, followed up by Talents, Duster, Lightning Storm as the main targets. And then your board protection or your board clears in the form of Book of Eclipses and Droplets. And then finally, the last 2 punishments, because if you feel you're going to be going into a grind game or a game where punishment is going to come in clutch, then you're going to maximize this up. Another option for the extra deck, just to make sure you always have a monster that is stronger than one of your opponent's monsters, is playing the 5-headed dragon, as it will be I believe it is a level 12 off the top of my head, but it definitely has 5,000 attack. So that gives a way of being able to pop, technically, any card that your opponent presents onto the board. But that's it for Chiron's build. Did incredibly well today. Like I said, took on Pearlies, took on Dark Worlds, took on Crystal Beast, and then also took on Labyrinth. So it did have a nice range of decks to be facing. I feel Labyrinth could possibly have been the most tricky duel that he had, purely because it didn't rely on the extra deck as much. Whereas when you're looking at something like the Pearlies, if you're ripping away the extra deck, it can make it very difficult. But that's it for the Dogmatika deck. I do like the way it plays, and I'm quite happy to see it come back into the fold purely because of the lack of Rise Heart now. It still falters to stuff like Draw and Lock Burn, and it still falters to stuff like D-Shifter, but it does mean that at a local environment, this deck can be very, very powerful, very good, and being able to present a boss monster in the form of the Albas can be near invaluable. Anyway, congratulations to Kyron on that one. Thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions, by all means, please put in the comments down below, and either I will ask Kyron, or Kyron will be able to answer them himself directly. But for now, as absolutely always, stay safe, and of course, happy dueling.